In every there are people who rise above excuses, individuals who keep moving forward even when their emotions try to hold them back. They do not wait for the perfect moment, nor do they rely on sudden sparks of inspiration. Instead, they follow something deeper, something steadier, an internal order that tells them, do what must be done. This is the quiet force behind every great transformation, from warriors who shaped history to ordinary men and women who rebuilt their lives from nothing. And today, we are opening a story that reveals where that force truly comes from. In this journey, you will discover why the most consistent people are not the strongest or the smartest, but those who learn to act even when their hearts resist. You will see how discipline grows not from motivation but from identity, and how a forgotten ancient principle continues to shape those who refuse to bend in the face of hardship. This is a story of struggle, awakening, and the silent power that pushes a person forward when every part of them wants to stop. If you find meaning in stories of resilience, courage, and personal growth, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Let's begin. Long before this story begins, long before the names of warriors were carved into memory, the people of ancient Japan spoke of a quiet force that lived beneath intention. They called it Yamato Damashii, not a slogan of pride, not a banner carried into battle, but a way of describing the invisible moment when a person continues forward even after their thoughts falter. It was the recognition that knowledge alone was never enough, that understanding the path and walking it were two entirely different realities. In this world, the mind could hesitate, doubt, or fear, yet the spirit could still rise and push the body onward. To the elders of that time, this was the essence of true strength. As we move deeper into the unfolding tale, the meaning of this ancient idea begins to weave naturally into the journey we have already started. We began with the notion that consistent individuals do not depend on fleeting feelings. And now, this old principle reveals the foundation beneath that truth. Yamato Damashii was the answer to a question that every generation has asked. What carries a person past the point where motivation ends? It did not glorify force or conquest. Instead, it honored the internal bridge between what a person knows they should do and what they actually choose to do. It named the moment when action triumphs over hesitation. Imagine a young man in a quiet village, taught from childhood to respect wisdom, to read the patterns of the world, to study ideas that promised greatness. He learns them all, repeats them flawlessly, impresses every teacher with the sharpness of his mind. Yet when life asks him to rise, to take a step that demands courage or discipline, he freezes. His knowledge is vast, but his actions are hollow. The elders watch him with a sadness deeper than disappointment, for they see a dangerous gap forming inside him, a distance between understanding and embodiment. They tell him that without the spirit that turns knowledge into motion, even the brightest student will drift like a leaf caught in a quiet stream. This is where Yamato Damashii enters the story, not as a mystical force but as a lived truth. It teaches that a person may know the shape of their future and still fail to walk toward it. It teaches that a mind overflowing with ideas is powerless if the body never moves. For the young man, these words feel like a gentle accusation, one that reflects a truth he has long avoided. He begins to realize that being capable of describing strength is not the same as living it, and that understanding perseverance does not grant the ability to endure. The elders tell him the spirit that moves a person forward is not sudden or dramatic. It is built quietly, in early mornings when the world is still, in long evenings when fatigue weighs heavy, in the moments when no one is watching and yet a choice must be made. Through repetition, through small acts of discipline, through the decision to act even when the mind prefers comfort, the spirit forms. It becomes a companion stronger than fear and more reliable than emotion. As he absorbs their words, He begins to see that Yamato Damashii is not a distant concept, but something living inside every person who has ever chosen duty over doubt. The wisdom they pass to him is not meant for warriors alone. It is meant for anyone who seeks to turn desire into reality. Slowly, he understands that the force that carries individuals beyond their weakness is not born in books or lessons. It grows from the courage to act, again and again, until action becomes identity. And with this realization, the story shifts, drawing him toward a path where the spirit within him will finally awaken and guide him beyond the limits he once believed he could not cross. When the young man finally accepted that understanding alone could not carry him forward, fate placed in his path someone who would challenge every comfortable belief he held. This man was Kado, a teacher whose reputation traveled quietly from village to village, not through grand stories of triumph, but through whispered tales of his unyielding discipline and the transformations he guided in those who sought him out. Kaido appeared without introduction, walking with the calm certainty of someone who never wastes breath on explaining who he is. The young man first met him on a dusty road at dawn, where Kaido observed him practicing the movements he had memorized but never truly embodied. His stance was elegant yet loose, precise yet empty, the posture of someone who could imitate strength but not sustain it. Kaido watched him for a long moment before speaking a single sentence that struck deeper than any criticism he had ever heard. "Your body hesitates because your spirit has never been tested." Those words unsettled him more than the most complex lesson he had ever learned. Kaido did not speak of knowledge, talent, or technique. He pointed directly at the gap the young man had tried so hard to ignore, the space where his understanding failed to become action. Without waiting for permission, Kaido adjusted the young man's posture, then instructed him to repeat the same simple movement again and again. At first, the young man welcomed the instruction, imagining that mastering this new form would be no different from learning any other piece of knowledge. But Kaido was not a teacher of ideas. He was a teacher of persistence. Every time the movement faltered, Kaido corrected him, sometimes gently, sometimes with a firmness that left no room for excuses. As the sun climbed and the hours stretched into a haze of repetition, the young man felt his confidence crumble. His muscles shook, his breath turned ragged, and his mind whispered that he had done enough, that the lesson surely must be complete. Yet Kaido offered no rest. Each correction came with a quiet demand to continue. Pain bloomed in his arms and legs, not the sharp pain of injury, but the deep ache of effort sustained beyond familiar limits. This was the kind of pain he had avoided all his life, the kind he once believed was unnecessary for someone who understood the theory of discipline. But with each repetition, each trembling attempt to hold form under pressure, something unfamiliar began to take shape within him. Kaido spoke very little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He explained that discipline was not forged in comfort or built through inspiration. It grew only when the body was pushed to the edge of its endurance and still commanded to rise. He told the young man that strength without persistence was fragile, and talent without resilience would shatter at the first sign of difficulty. Most importantly, Kaido taught him that the spirit does not awaken in a single dramatic moment. It emerges slowly, through countless instances when a person chooses to continue despite every instinct urging them to stop. Days turned into weeks, and the training never grew easier. Kaido changed the exercises, but the rhythm remained the same. Practice, correction, repetition, endurance. The young man began to understand that the purpose was not to perfect a single movement, but to reshape the relationship between his mind and his body. He learned to step beyond hesitation, to silence the voice that begged for rest, and to trust the stability of action over the shifting nature of feeling. Somewhere in the midst of the fatigue and the repetition, the idea of Yamato Damashii ceased to be a distant concept. It became something he felt in the tightening of his stance, in the steadying of his breath, In the moment he continued not because he wanted to, but because he had chosen to. By the time Kaido finally allowed him a moment of rest, the young man realized his life had already begun to change. The world around him was the same, yet he perceived it differently. Challenges no longer appeared as barriers but as invitations to test the spirit awakening within him. Kaido had not simply taught him discipline. He had revealed the path to becoming someone who acts with consistency even in the face of fatigue and doubt. And with that revelation, the young man stepped into the next chapter of his journey, carrying the first true spark of transformation within him. There came a morning when Tatayoshi rose before Kaido called for training, not out of obligation or fear of correction, but because something inside him refused to remain still. The transformation had not arrived in a single revelation. It had grown quietly over countless days of repetition, fatigue, and the silent war between his mind's reluctance and his spirit's insistence. He no longer measured progress by how well he executed a technique, but by how quickly he responded to challenge. Without hesitation, the young man who once dreamed of becoming a warrior now carried himself with the calm certainty of someone who understood that identity is not granted by ambition, but forged through action. His steps were steady, his gaze unshaken, and for the first time, Kaido saw no wavering in the way Tatayoshi held his stance. As training continued, the shift became unmistakable. In the early days, Tatayoshi had approached each exercise by weighing his comfort against the demands placed upon him, always negotiating internally, always searching for a moment to rest or a reason to slow down. But these negotiations gradually dissolved. When Kaido instructed him to repeat a movement, Tatayoshi no longer paused to calculate the effort required. His body responded immediately, guided not by the turbulence of feeling, but by a conviction that had settled deep within him. Every motion carried the quiet confidence of someone who no longer asked, "Can I?" but simply acted because this was who he had become. Kaido noticed the change not through words, but through the subtle resilience in Tatayoshi's breath, the endurance in his posture, and the absence of doubt in his eyes. The master understood that this was the turning point every student must reach. The moment when discipline ceases to be an external force and becomes an internal truth. Tatayoshi had crossed an invisible threshold where struggle no longer felt like an obstacle, but rather a natural part of his path. He no longer identified as someone chasing strength. He moved like someone who possessed it. The fragile distinction between trying and being had faded. One evening, after a long day of rigorous practice, Kaido assigned an exercise that once would have overwhelmed Tatayoshi. It demanded balance, precision, and unwavering focus, requiring him to maintain a difficult position while repeating a sequence of movements designed to strain both body and mind. In the past, he would have faltered or looked to Kaido for reassurance. But this time he settled into the stance with calm determination. The pain arrived quickly, radiating through his legs and shoulders. But he did not yield. Instead, he breathed steadily, allowing the discomfort to wash over him without resistance. He performed each motion with deliberate intent, not to prove anything, not to impress, but because he understood that this was simply what a warrior does. Kaido watched in silence, recognizing that Tatayoshi's transformation was complete. The young man no longer sought validation or praise. He had absorbed the lessons of persistence so deeply that effort itself became a reflection of his identity. When he finally completed the exercise, sweat soaking his clothes, he did not collapse or celebrate. He simply nodded, acknowledging the task accomplished, prepared for whatever came next. That night, as Tatayoshi sat beneath the fading light, he reflected on the path that had brought him here. He remembered the boy who once admired the idea of warriors but lacked the resolve to live as one. Now, without realizing exactly when it had happened, he had stepped into a new self. The words "I want to be a warrior" no longer held meaning for him. Desire had been replaced by embodiment. He felt no need to declare it, because every breath, every movement, and every choice already spoke for him. In that quiet moment, Tatayoshi understood the essence of the spirit that had guided him this far. It was not a voice pushing him forward, but a presence within him that no longer entertained doubt or hesitation. He had become the kind of person who acts without internal struggle, who meets each challenge with steady resolve. And as he looked toward the horizon, he sensed that his journey was only beginning, but he would walk it not as someone aspiring to greatness, but as someone who had embraced who he truly was. There came a point in Tatayoshi's training when the old lessons he had once memorized began to take on an entirely different weight. In the past, he had recited words about perseverance, discipline, and resilience with ease, believing that understanding their meaning was enough to carry him through any hardship. But under Kaido's relentless guidance, he discovered that knowledge spoken in comfort bears little resemblance to knowledge lived in strain. The gap between theory and reality had once seemed small, but now he understood it was vast, and crossing it required more than clever thoughts or good intentions. It required a spirit capable of turning understanding into movement, and movement into habit, and habit into identity. Without that inner force, even the most inspiring ideas faded the moment they met resistance. As Tatayoshi continued through his daily routines, he noticed how repetition slowly carved patterns into him that no amount of intellectual study ever could. Each morning began with the same exercises, each motion mirrored the day before, and each correction from Kaido felt like another chisel stroke shaping something deeper than muscle. At first, he resisted the monotony, frustrated that progress seemed invisible, but over time he realized that repetition was the heart of transformation. It was through returning to the same stance hundreds of times, through holding a position until his body trembled, through pushing past the familiar limits of endurance, that he learned the true nature of discipline. Emotion could spark effort, but only relentless practice could sustain it. He remembered the earlier version of himself, the young man who believed discipline meant acting with passion, imagining that powerful feelings would be enough to carry him through difficulty. But Kaido had shown him that emotion, while useful, is fleeting. It rises and falls like the tide, and anyone who relies on it will eventually find themselves stranded when it recedes. What mattered was the steady rhythm of action taken even when the heart felt heavy, even when the mind whispered excuses, even when the body begged for rest. Strength, he realized, was not born from momentary bursts of enthusiasm but from the quiet, persistent commitment to show up again and again. Kaido reinforced this lesson without grand speeches or dramatic instruction. He simply required Tatayoshi to return to the same drills, the same patterns, the same foundational skills, until they no longer felt like tasks but like natural extensions of his being. There were moments when Tatayoshi questioned the purpose of such repetition, wondering how something so simple could shape him into someone capable of facing hardship with unwavering resolve. But with time, he began to recognize subtle shifts: how his stance held firm even under fatigue, how his breath steadied in moments of pressure, how his mind no longer drifted into doubt when confronted with challenge. These changes were not sudden, and they did not announce themselves, yet they were undeniably real. One evening, as Kaido observed him from a distance, Tatayoshi performed a movement he had practiced countless times before. It was a simple sweep of the arm, paired with a shift of weight and a controlled exhale. But this time it carried the unmistakable fluidity of someone who no longer needed to think about what he was doing. The motion emerged from a deeper place, driven not by conscious intention but by an internal rhythm shaped through repetition. Kaido gave him a small nod, the kind that held more meaning than praise, acknowledging that Tatayoshi had finally grasped what words alone could never teach. In that moment, Tatayoshi understood that theory had served as the doorway to his journey but could never carry him through it. Ideas had shown him the path, but only action could walk it. And the steady discipline he now possessed was not a product of passion or inspiration, but the result of countless silent battles fought against his own resistance. He realized that the essence of the ancient spirit he sought was not found in dramatic acts of courage, but in the daily commitment to move forward, no matter how small the step. And as this truth settled into him, he felt a profound sense of clarity. The person he had become was shaped not by what he once wished to be, but by what he had repeatedly chosen to do. As Tatayoshi's journey drew toward its natural culmination, he began to recognize the truth that had always been quietly present in Kaido's teachings. It was not the rush of excitement at the start of a new challenge, nor the fire of momentary inspiration that shaped a person, but the unwavering commitment to act according to one's principles and responsibilities. He reflected on the days when his own desire wavered, when his emotions whispered that it would be easier to pause or turn aside. And he realized that those moments had been tests of his character, not of his skill. Every repetition, every disciplined motion, every day when he pushed forward despite fatigue or doubt, had quietly reinforced the foundation of who he was becoming. What Tatayoshi learned, above all, was that identity is inseparable from action. To say I am a warrior is not a simple statement of aspiration, it is a declaration that carries with it a responsibility to live consistently in alignment with that truth. Motivation may come and go, a fleeting spark that lights a path for a brief moment, but identity anchors a person in the enduring currents of their own choices. Duty, similarly, is not a burden but a guide, an internal compass that directs behavior even when feelings falter. The warrior does not wait for inspiration. The warrior acts because it is who they are. The synergy of identity and duty forms a resilience that no external circumstance can shake. A momentum that carries action forward, whether the heart is full of confidence or shadowed by fear. As he reflected on his growth, Tatayoshi understood that Kaido's harsh but precise instruction had been about more than martial skill. It had been about forging a mind capable of translating knowledge into action without hesitation or internal negotiation. Discipline was no longer a chore, repetition no longer a test, and effort no longer a struggle. Each act flowed naturally from his commitment to the self he had chosen to embody. He felt an inner steadiness, a quiet authority over his own will, and an unspoken assurance that challenges ahead could not divert him from his chosen path. This was the essence of the unshackable individual, the one whose choices are rooted not in the fickle tides of emotion, but in the solid ground of identity and duty. Tatayoshi's journey illustrates a universal truth. The people who achieve consistency, mastery, and lasting impact are rarely those driven solely by passion. They are those who have internalized their purpose and act accordingly. Every day, regardless of fleeting feelings, they are shaped not by what they wish to do in a moment of enthusiasm, but by who they have committed themselves to become. In embracing this truth, Tatayoshi stepped fully into his role, not as a student hoping to be a warrior, but as a warrior who lived and breathed the principles that defined him. Thank you so much for following Tatayoshi's journey with us today. If this story inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a tale of perseverance, discipline, and the power of identity in shaping action-driven lives.